After a 12-hour flight, I showed up unannounced to surprise my husband at his guy's cabin weekend, bourbon in hand. Just as I stepped in, I heard him say, if she disappeared, the insurance payout could wipe my debt. His friend laughed, or finally date her sister guilt-free. I left the bourbon. By morning, I was in Costa Rica. 2 weeks later, his sister called me in tears. Let me rewind. 13 years together, 10 married, and this weekend was his sacred guys-only cabin trip. No phones, no wives, just bourbon and fishing. But I missed him. So I packed his favorite bourbon, talked TSA into letting it through, and pictured his face when I walked in. Surprised, happy, maybe more. I thought it'd be romantic. Instead, I opened the creaky cabin door when I heard this. I stood frozen in the doorway. The bourbon slipped from my fingers and thudded onto the cabin's old wooden floor. That was the only sound I made. I didn't say a word, didn't scream or cry. I just left. I walked right back out, past the truck still warm from the drive up, and I started my descent down the trail. I didn't even turn around when Grant yelled my name. He'd heard the thud, I guess. I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because he knew exactly what I'd heard. By morning, I was on a plane to Costa Rica. I'd booked it on my phone from the back of a beat-up shuttle van, while Grant called me 16 times and left voicemails that ranged from panicked to furious. I didn't listen to a single one. The second I landed, I turned my phone off. And I started writing down everything. Everything I remembered, everything I suspected, everything I dismissed over the last year. And believe me, there was plenty. Looking back, the signs were there. They weren't screaming in my face, more like quiet, careful whispers I chose not to hear, like how Grant suddenly cared about term life insurance. Out of nowhere. One night last fall, he brought it up while we were watching Netflix. It's just smart, he said. I mean, what if something happened to one of us? One of us, he said. But he only bought a policy for me. And I let him. I let him convince me it was just in case. And that I was worth more than he was. That he didn't need a policy. That it was morbid to talk about anyway. I signed the papers and didn't ask questions. Because that's what I did in our marriage. I trusted. I also ignored the receipts. The ones that showed up in the trash from some steakhouse I'd never been to. 2 entrees, 2 drinks, 1 dessert with 2 spoons. I told myself it was probably lunch with a client. Even when I found the hotel key in his coat pocket, a room key from a boutique inn in Missoula, I let him spin some story about a client booking the room, then canceling. I believed it. Because I needed to. Because the truth would have shattered everything. But nothing shattered me like that night. That laugh. That horrible line about my sister. God, my sister. Lila. She's 7 years younger than me, the golden child. Blindingly pretty. Always a little lost. A little impulsive. I loved her to death. I trusted her. And now, I was replaying every hug they shared. Every inside joke they giggled over. Every late-night text he'd said was, just her needing advice. That laugh wasn't just Grant's. It was hers. I knew her voice. I'd grown up next to it, braided hair beside it, held its hand through heartbreak. I knew the sound of her laugh when it was trying to be coy. And she was in that cabin. My husband, my sister, together. Joking about me disappearing like I was some inconvenient chore they hadn't figured out how to clean up yet. I'd left the bourbon on the floor. I thought about that a lot in those first few days in Costa Rica. It felt symbolic. I didn't take revenge. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things or demand answers. I just left him something he loved, and I took me away. And that was the beginning of something I hadn't felt in years. The first morning in Costa Rica, I didn't cry. I expected to. I thought I'd wake up in my rented bungalow on the Nicoya Peninsula, hear the sound of birds I didn't recognize, and sob into the cheap cotton pillow. But I didn't. I brewed a pot of strong, earthy coffee and drank it barefoot on the balcony. I watched the jungle come alive around me. I felt the heaviness in my chest, yes, but it was laced with something else I hadn't expected. Clarity. See, betrayal does something wild to your brain. At first, it shocks you silent. But then, it sharpens you. It strips away the static of everyday survival, the laundry, the emails, the what should we have for dinner routine, and leaves behind one bright, hard thought. He thought I'd never fight back. And worse, he thought I was stupid. I spent those first few days in silence. I turned my phone on only once, just long enough to copy every message, voicemail, and email Grant had sent since I walked out of that cabin. There were 42 total. They ranged from, "It's not what you think," to, "You're being dramatic," then escalated to, "Come back so we can fix this," and finally bottomed out with, "Fine, run. Just remember the prenup." The prenup. That's when I smiled. He didn't realize I'd had it quietly amended 3 years ago when we refinanced the house. A tiny clause tucked into the paperwork, negotiated with a lawyer he'd never met. It gave me full ownership of the property, if infidelity or any form of intentional harm could be proven. Guess what, Grant? That recording from the cabin, the one picked up by the bourbon bottle smart cap I bought as a gag gift for your birthday last year? Yeah. That's more than just a laugh track. Thanks, Tech Bros. I never thought your $89 party recorder would become my personal black box. I uploaded it to a cloud drive and labeled the folder Vacation Memories. It included the audio clip, a screenshot of the insurance policy he'd pushed so hard for, and the full text log of every shady message I'd ever saved. I didn't want revenge. Not yet. I wanted leverage. I wanted options. And the more I sat in that little bungalow watching the waves crash and the iguanas wander across the road like they owned it, the more I realized he hadn't just tried to leave me, he'd tried to erase me. But he didn't know who he was dealing with. The call came exactly 13 days after I left. I was standing in the surf at sunset, my toes buried in wet sand, when my phone, now used only for select calls and silent victories, lit up. Lila, my sister. I stared at the screen for a long second. The woman whose laugh had echoed through that cabin. The one who'd swatted my hand away from the last dinner roll 100 times growing up. Who had cried in my lap over some boy who ghosted her at 22. Who had once whispered to me, "You're the only person in the world who really knows me." I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready. But 30 minutes later, as I dried off under a woven palapa roof, it rang again. Same name. Same number. But this time she left a message. I played it. "Avery, please pick up. I didn't know. I mean, I knew some, but not that. Not what he said. Not the insurance stuff. I swear. I thought it was just, he said you were unhappy, that you were thinking about leaving. I didn't think." She was crying. "He's gone, Avery. He left, took the truck, left me at the cabin with no money, no phone charger, nothing. I had to hitchhike to Missoula. I don't know where he is. I think he's scared of you." Scared of me? That's when I knew. Something had rattled him. And my dear baby sister, she was starting to realize just how much she didn't know about the man she climbed into bed with. The voicemail cut off, but 10 seconds later another one followed. "You've got to call me back. I need to explain. I swear I didn't mean to hurt you." I didn't think he'd actually go through with anything. I thought he just liked the attention, the power. I thought it was a sick joke. "Please, I'm in over my head." She was panicking now, and I just sat there listening to her fall apart. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't the one unraveling. I was steady, cold, even. Not cruel, but distant, like a woman who'd finally stepped back far enough to see the whole picture. And it wasn't pretty. It wasn't just Grant. She betrayed me too. No matter how scared she sounded, she'd made her choice. She'd crawled into his world and slammed the door behind her. But now, she wanted my help opening it back up. I poured myself a glass of water and took it out to the hammock. Let her words swirl around me like smoke. She didn't know it yet, but I was going to call her back. Just not yet. First, I had one more surprise to send to Grant, and it would arrive at a place he never expected. His father's house. Grant's father, Harold Callahan, is old school. Retired military. Built like a brick wall and twice as stubborn. He once told me I shook hands like a man and meant it as the highest compliment. He also doesn't trust technology. Still writes checks. Still reads a paper newspaper every morning. Still insists on hard copies for anything important. So I sent him a package. A carefully curated, beautifully wrapped box. It contained a printout of Grant's text messages, the ones mocking my age, gloating about the life insurance. A typed transcript of the cabin recording. A photocopy of our marriage certificate. A copy of the amended prenup clause. And, centered on top, the bourbon bottle. The same one I dropped on the floor, slightly scuffed but unbroken. Inside it, thanks to the techie smart cap I'd once bought as a novelty, was a tiny internal recorder. Still functional. Still loaded. I included a short note, Hal. I figured you should know the kind of man your son turned into. Thought you raised him better. Avery. No signature. No threats. Just a gentle nudge of truth, hand-delivered via overnight express to his home in Big Fork. I timed the delivery perfectly. It landed on a Saturday morning. And I know Hal. He opens every package with a knife so sharp it could shave sunlight. He would have poured a black coffee, sat at that long oak dining table, and started reading. By Sunday evening, my phone rang. Unknown number, I answered. Calm. Certain. Avery. It's Hal. He didn't sound angry. He sounded tired. I got your package. Silence. He said it was all a misunderstanding. That you were spiraling. That you ran off and left him stranded. I wanted to believe him. Hell, I tried to believe him. His voice cracked, just slightly. But I raised my kids to own their mess. And what I read in those transcripts? That's not a man owning anything. That's a coward. I didn't say a word. I let him speak. I'm sorry, Avery. For what it's worth. You were the best thing that ever happened to him, and the way he treated you, there's no excuse. Still, I stayed quiet. Then came the part that mattered. If you decide to press charges, he said, voice low and certain, you'll have my full support. He's got accounts he doesn't think I know about. Retirement investments in my name. He'll need a lawyer. And I won't be paying for one. I exhaled, slow, measured, almost peaceful. Thank you, Hal, I said. And I meant it. That package didn't just change Grant's standing with his father. It changed the narrative. Because now, it wasn't just me whispering the truth. It was starting to echo. I finally called her back. I waited until the sun was high and hot over the jungle canopy. I sat on my little balcony with a lemon soda in hand, and I dialed Lila like I was ordering takeout. Calm, detached, knowing exactly what I wanted. She answered on the first ring. Avery? That voice. It was hoarse, frantic, the kind of voice that hasn't slept in days and suddenly knows it's not the main character anymore. I'm here, I said evenly. She let out a breath that sounded like it came from her bones. I'm so sorry. God, I know that doesn't fix anything. I was stupid. I was lonely. He made it seem like you didn't care anymore, that you were done. He said you were thinking about leaving him for months. I let the silence stretch. Because I wanted to see what she'd fill it with. He said you were having an emotional affair with some guy from work. He showed me texts, but now I think they were fake. I think he made them up to justify what we were doing. You think? I asked, letting my voice go cold. She hiccuped a little sob. I know. I was a fool. But I didn't know about the insurance thing. I swear. I thought it was just a fling. A mistake. Something he'd regret. Not. Her voice broke again. Not that he'd ever wish you gone. Except he didn't just wish it. I said, steady as stone. He said it. Out loud. With you in the room. And you laughed. I didn't think he meant it, she whispered. No, you didn't want to think he meant it. I corrected. That's different. She went quiet. I could picture her, curled up in some borrowed motel bed, mascara smudged, phone gripped like a lifeline she didn't deserve. Why are you calling me? I asked. I don't know, she said. Because you're the only person I've ever trusted. Even now. That landed like a dull blade. Trust? Now? You were the only one who ever really knew me. She added softly. That's the problem, Lila, I said. I did know you, and I never thought you'd be the one with the knife. More silence. Then she whispered, There's something else. I don't know if I should tell you. I said nothing. She swallowed hard. Grant had another policy, she said. A second life insurance one. In his name. You're not the beneficiary. I am. My heart stopped cold. What? I didn't know until yesterday. I found it in his glove box. It was filed months ago. He told me it was just a backup. But Avery, why would I be the one who gets it if he dies? I stood up, the soda nearly spilling over my hand. Because this wasn't just infidelity. This wasn't just betrayal. This was danger. And if Lila was right, then Grant hadn't just planned for one of us to vanish. He'd planned for one of us to win. I barely slept that night. Not because I was scared, though the thought of Grant naming Lila as his beneficiary sent a fresh chill through me, but because I was angry. Not the kind of white-hot anger that burns fast and fades. No, this was slow, cold, focused. I didn't run from fire. I studied it. By sunrise, I was already logged into the cloud storage I'd created, sorting everything I had. And I had a lot. Screenshots, copies of our life insurance paperwork, emails from the broker who'd processed the policy Grant convinced me to sign. I even had a recorded phone call where he told the broker he wanted it done. Fast, no drama, she's cool with it. He'd spoken for me like I was an errand. An afterthought. I pulled up the policy again. $750,000 if I died. Accidental death? $1.2 million. I remembered the language. Untraceable accident qualifies for full payout. It made me feel sick. I started calling around. Carefully. Quietly. First, the original insurance company. I posed as myself. Curious. Cautious. Just doing some account cleanup. The woman on the phone was polite, but firm. Yes, the policy was active. Yes, I was still the insured. Yes, the payout was substantial. Then I asked a question I wasn't sure I'd get an answer to. Has my husband applied for any other policies in his name recently? She paused. I'm sorry, I can't disclose. What if I told you I had reason to believe he's named my sister as the beneficiary on one? Dead silence. Then, carefully. I'm going to transfer you to our fraud department. Bingo. An hour later, I was on the phone with a man named Zach, a fraud specialist who sounded more like a bloodhound with a spreadsheet than a customer service rep. I gave him everything. The audio, the policy number, the names. He whistled low. I can't confirm the existence of another policy, ma'am, he said slowly. But I can tell you this. If what you're saying is accurate, and your husband took out multiple high-value life insurance policies in a short window, with different beneficiaries and expressed intent to collect, he let the sentence hang. It's fraud, potentially felony level, and if there's even a whisper of foul play? Then, I asked, then it becomes something else entirely. I hung up and stared out at the Costa Rican coastline, the sky blooming with that dusky orange only tropical places seem to understand. Grant hadn't just bet on my death, he'd hedged his bets. One policy for if I disappeared. One for if Lila didn't play along. And now, both of us were liabilities. I wasn't sure what was worse, that Lila might have almost helped him pull it off, or that I still didn't know where he was. But I had a plan now, and the next piece of it was waiting in a dusty safety deposit box back in Montana, under my maiden name, locked with a 6-digit code that only I knew. It held the last piece of insurance paperwork I never told Grant I kept, my own policy. Signed, funded, and naming me as both the insured and the beneficiary, because I was smart enough to build a backdoor. And that policy? It held the time-stamped proof that Grant had forged my signature once before. Game on. 3 weeks after I disappeared, I bought a one-way ticket back to Montana. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. Not Lila. Not even my best friend Tasha, who'd been texting me daily with vague "you okay" messages and increasingly aggressive heart emojis. I needed silence. I needed stealth. and I needed the element of surprise. The plane touched down just after midnight. The airport smelled like cold metal and jet fuel, and I inhaled it like perfume. I rented a no-frills sedan under my maiden name, wrapped my curls in a scarf, and drove straight to the storage facility downtown. The one I'd opened a year ago when I needed more space for holiday stuff. Inside, behind 2 dusty tubs of Christmas wreaths and a fake tree we never used, sat the real prize, a waterproof lockbox. I knelt down, spun the dial, and opened it. Inside was every copy of every policy I'd ever signed. The original one from before Grant added me to his, and the second one I'd quietly updated on my own after I found out he'd forged my signature once before. I kept that paper like a weapon, like a truth grenade. And now? It was time to pull the pin. The next morning, I visited Martin & Colby Insurance Partners in person, the firm Grant used for our shared policy. The one where he'd convinced me to sign a revised document, just to increase the payout a little. Funny thing was, that signature wasn't mine, not the new one anyway. I walked in with a copy of the original, and the new forged one, side by side. The receptionist blinked at me. "Can I help you?" I smiled. "Yes, I'd like to speak to your internal compliance officer." An hour later, I was in a glass office across from a man in a navy tie who looked like he knew exactly how fast this could go nuclear. "You're saying this second signature isn't yours?" he asked. "I'm saying," I said calmly, "you've got a fraudulent policy on file, and if you don't remove it immediately, I'll be introducing it to my attorney, my bank, and every state fraud agency that cares to listen." He paled. I slid a copy of my notarized signature across the table, the one I'd filed when I took out my own policy last year. "Compare them," I said. He did. It didn't take long. "I'm going to have to escalate this," he said, already typing. "I'm counting on it," I replied. By noon, a formal investigation was opened. By 3 p.m., Grant's entire policy was frozen pending review. He'd get a letter, of course. Maybe even a call. But he wouldn't see it coming until his next stunt failed. And failed hard. Then I made one final stop. Maple Ridge Funeral Home. I'd been there before, when Grant's mother passed a few years back. Her ashes were placed in a tasteful, overpriced marble urn, and Grant made a show of sobbing so hard, I had to drive us both home. Now, I was here for something different. I sat down with the funeral director, a kind-eyed woman named Lynette, and said, "I need to pre-plan a funeral. For someone who isn't dead, yet." She blinked, then raised one brow. "It's not for me," I added. "It's a message." I handed her a name, Grant Callahan. I picked out a basic urn, no engraving, no service, cremation only, and I paid for it in full. "Would you like to leave a card with the reservation?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Write this down exactly. Life comes at you fast, especially when you try to profit off mine." She didn't ask questions. By the time I walked out of that funeral home, the trap was set. One forged policy, under investigation. One sister scared and unraveling. One father turned informant. And one very alive woman, ready to bury the man who tried to write her obituary early. I didn't plan to see Grant that day. But fate, or maybe just poetic timing, served him up like a side of karma. I was at the bank finalizing the freeze on our joint account. Not that there was much left in it. Grant had drained it right before I left, but I needed the paperwork for court, for the investigator, for the lawyer I'd hired quietly, with money he didn't know I'd saved. I was sitting across from the branch manager when I heard his voice. Loud, irritated, a little too confident. "What do you mean the account's frozen?" "I'm not trying to make withdrawals, I am making one." I turned slowly. He was in the glass-walled office 2 doors down, pacing, hands in the air like a man who'd never been told no. He looked thinner, not in a good way, jaw tight, eyes twitchy, the kind of panic you can't dress up in a button-down shirt. And then he saw me. Our eyes locked. He froze, just for a second, like he was trying to compute what he was seeing. Because I wasn't supposed to be here. I was supposed to be in Costa Rica, spiraling. Or maybe missing. Or maybe, in some dark corner of his mind, dead. But I wasn't. I was alive. And I looked better than I had in months. He stepped into the hallway like he'd just remembered how legs worked. Avery? His voice cracked. I stood, smoothed my blazer, and turned to the branch manager. Excuse me, I said, sweet as sugar. Would you mind printing an updated transaction history before I go? She nodded, eyes wide, and I stepped out. Grant was already in front of me, mouth open, hands twitching. You're back, apparently. You didn't. You just left. I thought. I know what you thought. I folded my arms. You thought I'd crawl away, cry quietly, fade out, be erased. His mouth twitched. I stepped closer. Not afraid. Not one bit. Instead, I whispered, I froze every account you touched, opened a fraud investigation on the forged signature you used, and I mailed a funeral home your name with a paid reservation. You'll be hearing from a few departments soon, legal, federal, and otherwise. His face blanched. That policy is gone, canceled, flagged. And your dad? I smiled. He sends his regards. He stared at me, something flickering in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Fear. You don't understand, he hissed. I had to do it. I was drowning, Avery. The debt, the credit cards, the failed business. You could have asked for help. You wouldn't have given it. You're right, I said coldly. Not for that. Not for cheating. Not for plotting. His voice rose. You're making this into something it's not. I was joking. On a recording, I cut in. Heard by a lawyer. 2 investigators. Your father. His mouth opened. Closed. Then he leaned in, his voice low and vicious. You think this is over? You think people are going to side with you when they hear you ran away? I didn't run, I said, smiling. I watched. I pulled out a flash drive and pressed it into his hand. He looked down at it like it burned. What is this? Everything you said. Every text you sent. Every transfer you made. Every lie you told. Labeled. Indexed. Admissible. I leaned in, matched his stare. Play it. Or don't. Either way, it's already in the hands of the people who matter. Then, I turned and walked away, my heels clicking like a metronome, counting down the seconds of his freedom. I didn't look back. But I didn't have to. I'd already seen the end of his story, and I was writing it now. She showed up at my motel 3 days later. No makeup. Puffy eyes. Hoodie pulled over her head, like a teenager who'd just been grounded. I was sipping coffee in the courtyard, flipping through a legal folder, when I heard the door to my room creak open behind me. Avery? I didn't turn around. Just took another sip and said, Room wasn't locked, but that doesn't mean you're invited. She stepped closer anyway, arms wrapped around herself like she might shatter. I didn't know, she said again, voice small. I didn't know what he was planning. I finally turned, looked her dead in the eyes. You didn't ask. She flinched. Do you know how many women sit on court benches telling themselves it was just a joke? I asked. How many of them don't believe their husbands could ever be capable of something dark until they're in a hospital bed? Or worse. Tears welled up in her eyes. I thought he loved me. I laughed, not kindly. Sweetheart, I said, setting my coffee down. Grant doesn't love anyone. He collects people like spare batteries. And you? You were just his backup plan. She shook her head violently. No, he told me he was leaving you. He did, I said, voice flat, the moment I stopped being profitable. I stood up then, slow and deliberate, the file folder still in my hand. I flipped it open and pulled out a single sheet. A copy of the second life insurance policy. The one with her name on it. I held it up. This is how much he valued you, I said, as long as you were useful. But if you ever got inconvenient, he had a backup plan for you too. She stared at the paper like it was written in blood. Her knees buckled slightly, and she sat down on the curb, shaking. He told me he'd canceled that, she whispered. I crouched next to her, not touching her, just close enough for her to feel the cold truth coming off my skin. He didn't cancel it, I said softly. He increased it. Last month. Her face crumpled. I thought I was different. No, Lila, I said. You were just next. She looked up at me, eyes rimmed red. What do I do now? I exhaled. The old me, the big sister, the fixer, would have scooped her up, driven her to a safe place, made hot cocoa and drawn a battle plan. But that woman died, somewhere between the bourbon bottle hitting the floor and the flight to Costa Rica. Still, I wasn't made of stone. You tell the truth, I said finally. To the investigators. To the insurance company. And if you're smart, you lawyer up before he flips on you. Her eyes widened. He wouldn't. He already has. She started to shake. I walked back to my chair, picked up my coffee, and let her sit with that. Let her realize that the man she thought would protect her was always going to use her. That she hadn't just betrayed her sister, she'd betrayed herself. It happened on a Tuesday. Cloudy, still, the kind of day that feels like the whole world is holding its breath. I was sitting in the courthouse parking lot, waiting to file one last document, a protective order, just to seal off every last legal door Grant might try to crawl through, when my phone buzzed. Blocked number. I answered with a quiet, even, "This is Avery." "Miss Callahan," came a clipped, professional voice. "This is Special Investigator Monica Graves, with the Montana Division of Insurance Fraud. Just wanted to let you know, Grant Callahan has been taken into custody." I blinked. Already? We had enough with the forged signature and the two conflicting life insurance policies, but the audio recording, the text messages, the funeral home receipt? She actually chuckled. That was the cherry on top. I felt my pulse surge. Not with panic, with release. "He's being charged?" I asked. "Forgery, insurance fraud, attempted criminal conspiracy, and violation of federal insurance statutes. More pending." "Oh, and Miss Callahan?" "Yes. He tried to tell us you coerced him into signing the policies. That you were the one planning to disappear. You should have seen his face when we played back the cabin recording. That made me laugh. An actual laugh, short and sharp and real. I bet he didn't like that." "No, ma'am, he really didn't." I hung up and stared at the sky for a long moment, the clouds beginning to part just enough for a sliver of blue to peek through. The man who tried to erase me now had a mugshot. The man who laughed about my death was being fingerprinted under fluorescent lights. I thought I'd cry, or cheer, or scream, but I didn't. I just sat in silence, like a woman who had finally come out the other side of the storm. And then I drove straight to my lawyer's office, handed her the last file, and signed the papers for my divorce. Filed. Final. Done. 1 hour later, Grant Callahan was in a holding cell. And I was free. The story made local news first. Montana man charged in dual insurance fraud scheme. They didn't name me, but they didn't have to. Small towns connect the dots faster than headlines ever could. My boutique's online orders doubled in a week. Turns out women know. We always know. And when one of us finally says, "Enough," it echoes in places we never expected. Lila gave her statement. Full and honest. She didn't sugarcoat her part in it, but she didn't protect him either. For once, she chose the truth over a man who wore charm like armor. She moved out of state a month later. I wished her well, quietly, from a distance. Some bridges you don't burn, you just never walk across them again. Grant pled guilty to 2 charges, and a deal was struck. 5 years. No chance of early parole. His lawyer tried to spin it as a moment of desperation, but the court wasn't moved. And neither was I. He reached out once. A letter. 4 pages of half apologies, twisted logic, and a final line that read, "I just didn't think you'd leave." I didn't write back. He still didn't get it. I didn't leave, Grant. I escaped. Now, I live on a stretch of land just outside Whitefish. It's quiet. Green. My mornings are coffee on the porch, with nothing but birdsong and peace. I reopened the boutique online only, just enough to stay busy. Just enough to fund weekend flights. Anywhere I feel like going. Sometimes Costa Rica. Sometimes nowhere. Sometimes just me, a book, and the sound of rain. The funeral home sent me a follow-up letter, asking if I wanted to claim Grant's cremation credit or transfer it. I mailed back the card with one handwritten note. Transfer it to the next woman who needs it more than I did. Someone will. Because here's the thing. I didn't win because I got revenge. I won because I didn't let him write my ending. I left the bourbon. I took my life back. And I wrote a new story. One where I don't just survive. I thrive.